Hello and welcome to my hobby bench and another bearing installation video featuring Boca bearings. Today I'm going to be installing a set of high-performance Boca bearings into my Saito FA-220a single-cylinder 4-stroke engine. So let's go straight to the table and get this done. Okay, so here on the table I've got all the items necessary for this bearing installation. I've got the massive Saito FA-220a crankshaft, the crankcase. Everything is cleaned and ready to accept bearings. I've got the set of bearings. I've got a short socket extension to use as a drive to drive that main bearing in place. I've got a small slotted screwdriver to remove the shield on the rear bearing, and a light hammer to tap the front bearing in place, the piece of wood to use for that. Right now it's sitting under my vise because this crankshaft is so long, it's gonna need to be elevated a little bit to actually get that the rear bearing in. So I'll just take both of these pieces of wood out. I've also got a small bottle here of Boca's Lightning Lube Road Power. I've squirted a small amount into this jar already to lubricate up these parts. So let's do that. Before I do that though, let me just say that the parts I'm using today are ENK 083C HP high performance parts, high performance bearings. And we will get the bearings prepped first, then I'll prep all the other parts and we'll get these installed. So this front bearing is a double rubber shielded bearing, as indicated by the 2RU in the part number. One side's green, one side's black. Both, the front bearing that came out of this engine was rubber sealed on both sides, so I'm not going to be removing a seal on this side. This rear bearing had two metal shields on it. I've already removed one, and I'm going to remove the other one right now. And then we'll get to installing these bearings. So the way I like to remove these metal ZZ is a suffix, or the part of the part number that denotes the metal shield, is I like to use this little thin slotted screwdriver, and I go right in near, just on the outer portion of the inner race, and just push in and pierce that just enough to get up and under that shield, and then just pull the shield right off like that. So now these bearings are ready to go. I'm just going to use a little bit of this lightning lube to lubricate up all the parts. Now I'm going to apply just a light coat just on the outer race of both of these bearings also. I've got my heat gun, my protective glove here, paper towel to wipe my finger off, and now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. I always install the rear bearing while it's on the crankshaft, so I'm just going to go ahead and slide this bearing in place. Snap it in place there, and then that way when I install the front bearing, I'll install the front bearing first, but then the front bearing installed in the case will act as a centering mechanism for the installation of the rear bearing. So now I'm going to get my glove on and heat this case up quite warm, because there's a lot of aluminum mass here, so this is going to need to be heated up quite a lot to expand enough to accept this bearing easily. And since I put a little bit of oil in there, you can tell when it's hot enough to accept the bearing is when you start to see little wisps of smoke from the oil. I'm not seeing any smoke, but I'm going to see if that's warm enough to install this front bearing. I'm just going to use my piece of wood here and the hammer to just tap that bearing in place, and boy, that went in super easy. So now the next thing I need to do is I need to elevate my vise now so it's a little bit higher so I can get the crankshaft installed. I think I'm going to have to heat this up quite a bit more because this crankcase is really large. And it's going to heat sink all of this heat and distribute it, because aluminum really heats up pretty evenly despite where you're putting it. So this is going to take a lot of heat to get this thing in here. It's feeling pretty warm even through my gloves, so I think we're ready here. So I'm just going to install this crankshaft in here, slide it into place, and believe it or not, it looks like that bearing just seated fully without even being tapped into place. That's a pretty rare thing. Sometimes that can happen, and a lot of that just simply depends on the tolerances of the crankcase versus the tolerances of the rear bearing or the bearing that happens with, because there's minute differences there, and quite honestly I'm surprised, and this is already installed. I don't even need to tap this in place because it's fully seated in the crankcase. That was probably one of the easier bearing installations I've ever done. But since this thing is so hot, I think I'm going to set it on the vise and say, that's our bearing installation video for today.